Welcome to the first 100 Days, a show for revenue practitioners by revenue practitioners, giving you unscripted access and tips to help you navigate any new transition or initiative, both in life and at work.
So I don't know if you're aware, but recently we keep hearing about this, the Great Resignation, where some people say it's up to 40% of people are thinking of switching their jobs. Recently we saw an article in Fortune that says 61%. Being on the recruiting side, can you share some observations?
Yeah, there's no doubt that organizations are just really struggling in terms of retention and holding on to the best and brightest that are out there, because there's so many opportunities that are being presented to them on a daily basis, and probably multiple times a day, depending on what skill and industry that they're in. So I think there's really two main observations that I see every day. That is because organizations have learned how to adapt to this remote working world. You don't have to live locally in order to be attractive to an organization. One of the largest technology organizations that we have partnered with for over 25 years primarily recruited for engineers out of the Bay Area for the entire time that we worked with them. And throughout the last 18 months, really had their eyes open to the fact that there are fantastic engineering talents out there in Indiana and Chicago and Michigan, and everywhere else in the country. And the main thing that they recognized was when the Bay Area went into its first lockdown, a lot of their engineers decided to go rent an Airbnb somewhere else. And so they were remote working from all of these other locations, and they really adapted this, team working style and strategy. But then those engineers would meet other people locally and then, kind of develop this referral strategy for bringing them into the organization. And so I think organizations that have adapted to that remote working environment faster than others are really recognizing how broad the ability for attracting talent can be outside of what they thought was a very geocentric strategy that they wanted to maintain and uphold. So that would be my first observation. The second one is employee engagement is really hard in this kind of a medium. When you and I can't sit in a room together, when we can't go out to dinner after work, when we can't, really spend time getting to know one another, and we're on these 1 hour, 30-minute blocks, it is just incredibly difficult to form a connection. And most individuals don't leave an organization, they leave a manager. And when you can't form that bond or that relationship with a leader, it's just hard to maintain the same level of stability and trust within that organization. And so you're going to be more open for opportunities as they get presented to you.
That makes sense. So I want to dig a little bit deeper on the first piece. So the remote working. So I think everyone now in the last 18 months, they know what remote working is. But have you seen companies figure out how to best adapt? I see both sides of the coin. So UserGems is 100% remote, and we've seen both the pros and the cons. But for larger organizations, how can you adapt effectively?
Yeah, I think it depends on what your starting point was, right? So my team has been remote forever. So I've always had a remote workforce that's worked for me. And so my, team of 15, 20, individuals that kind of lead the different functions that I oversee, we never went to an office together and sat in the conference room every day and, had that kind of an experience. So that was a much easier transition for us to adapt to the rest of the world becoming remote, because it's this is what we've been doing for a long time. What was harder for us was not being able to travel and see different people and things and environments. So that's a different type of adaptation. So I think you really got to be honest with yourself of, okay, what was the starting point? And then, if you're going completely remote from a group that was in the office all the time, recognizing that each individual is going to have a different level of, value that they put on that type of a working environment. And so really mapping that out and understanding at the individual level what's important to them, and trying to accommodate that as best as you possibly can as we navigate through this. It might be a hybrid strategy. People might love the remote work, and people might want to go even further remote, meaning like they want to go into 4-day 10-hour shifts or schedules, and like really try to adapt to a totally different flexibility within their their workload. And so I think we're still playing around a lot with that. So more to come, but I think it's really allowing individuals to customize the way that they want to work and whatever is the best for them. And as a leader, you have to be the one to kind of open the door for that to happen.
So that will lead me to my second question, and it's perfect that you guys, like your team's been remote since forever. So is there anything in particular that, or like even a hack that you feel like most effective for a manager? Because now it sounds like a lot of the responsibility on the manager to make sure that the employees are happy with the job and the company, and then build that rapport remotely. So have you discovered any hacks or tricks or any kind of playbooks really to build that natural rapport remotely?
So I'll tell you two things that I learned through failure, which is always the best way to learn if you can fail fast and just adjust. But the first thing is you have to be really self-aware of what your preferences are versus what your employees' preferences are. I could have an idea at 7 o'clock at night and want to talk about it, and then shoot a text message or an email or an IM, around the team, and then I get responses. And it was easy for me to think, oh, well, they must really want to talk about it now too. And then, we would get into these back and forths. And then, through, thankfully, one of my team members really just kind of being open and honest with me, sharing like, yeah, I don't really want to get, messages like that. But when I do, I feel like I have to respond, especially when I see other people from the team responding. And so being mindful of like when people really are open and want to communicate and what the different modalities of communication are, that's the first thing, right? So just don't think that because you're okay with it, everybody else is okay with it. And I think the second thing is kind of the same, but it is really easy in a remote work world to just always look at the gains of productivity because you don't have the hour commute into the office. You don't have the water cooler time. And so it's easy just to look at somebody's calendar and be like, oh, I'll block this hour. I'll block that half hour. I'll block, and then it's like you're just on the back-to-back schedule because you have nothing in between. It's like I don't have to walk to another meeting. I don't have to drive to that, that location. And so you don't get those natural interruptions in the day. So as a leader, you have to be mindful of that, I think, to really tell people like, hey, you need to go to lunch today. Even if you're going to order lunch, like, let me order lunch for you. And then you eat that lunch in your, sunroom, living room, back deck, whatever, like away from your computer. Create the natural interruptions in your day just to decompress, because if you wait for the end of the day, it's been way too long. And people just aren't wired to be 24/7, 365. Whether you are, a hyperactive person or not, you still just need those moments in the day to just step away, get a breath, look at something else besides your computer screen. So as a leader, you need to engineer that for some people because they're not going to do it naturally, and other people are going to want to take advantage of the ability to now have an always-on productive employee.
Yeah, that's true. So I think on that note, someone said that we need to have more meetings where the camera is off, or like take a walking meeting, things like that, as kind of like a hybrid. I mean, like, frankly, you need to take a break away from work, period. Yeah. But some people are saying that like just turn off the camera also helps.
Yeah. Well, and in my experience, the time away from work, I mean, it's hard to shut off thinking about some things that are really, really important, but just bringing in a different perspective of things you observe outside of work will help you solve for the things that you are observing. You get so, tunnel visioned into the things that are right in front of you. But yeah, I prefer to have about half of my calls during the day just on my phone, and right outside here's my backyard, so I'll walk outside and I'll sit down and kind of take a look around as I'm talking through, whatever we're meeting about. And if somebody says, hey, can you jump on camera? It's like, great. Do I need to look at something? Is it something you can email me? Like, you need to be, you need to allow yourself to be vulnerable and push back and say, hey, like I've been on the video calls all day, or, half my day are video calls. And if we could just talk, over the phone, great. If not, if it's absolutely necessary, sure. But let's just be honest with each other. If it isn't, let's skip over that and just talk through it. And those calls go a lot faster, actually. For some reason now, calls over the phone, if you're not looking at something and then finding new ways to kind of distract individuals, looking at something a different way 5 different times, you can usually just talk through something really, really quickly.
Interesting. That is true. I never noticed that, but that is true. Is it because like when you see face to face and you're gonna start making small talks?
Oh, of course.
And then,
yeah. And what? And that's great too. I mean, it's not, there is no, like anything, especially in recruiting, there's just no silver bullet for anything. It's like you have to put everything into the context and be willing to, be multidimensional in the way that you think and engage with others. Otherwise, you're going to fall into these traps of, it has to be like this, and why aren't we doing it in this very form-fitted process? And it's just not the way the world works.
And that's great. That is so true. Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm going to turn a lot of my meetings into just a phone call. I'm usually a face-to-face person, actually. I don't know why.
No,
So
I mean, listen,
I'm like either face-to-face or like SMS. I'm like, this is a weird person.
no, I get it. I mean, one of the biggest things for me to adapt to was just not traveling and seeing people truly face to face, right, in the same room. And thankfully, for the last 6 weeks, I've really started to travel again. But that's where I get all my energy from, is sitting across the table from somebody, thinking out loud, right, kind of riffing a bunch of different ideas and things. And so it was a big learning curve for me. And one of the biggest things for me was physical exercise. So just like being active was something that I just leaned on, really, really heavily during COVID, to just make sure that I wasn't losing, what I got my energy from, which was being around other people. And being outside in the middle of January in Chicago isn't really possible. So, I got this Whoop strap, and then they have like all these communities, so you can start to like engage with people. So that was kind of my social / physical exercise type of outlet.
Whoop's great. And we
It is
tried
good.
all kinds of tracking. Whoop is awesome. So talking about like traveling again and see people face to face, so on the sales side. So as a sales leaders, you've seen all these like job changes. I'm sure on your client side, you probably see that as well. How have these changes impacted your pipeline, if any?
Oof. Well, I mean, I think it was really different depending on what industry you were focused in our space in particular, right? So I was very, very lucky that at the onset of the pandemic, I was just starting to engage quite heavily in the healthcare space. So for healthcare, it was going like this, and then the pandemic hit, and then it went like this, because it just like, it accelerated the need for flexibility, travel, new protocols, testing, vaccine distribution, like all these crazy things that have never happened. And we had a great partner, AMN Healthcare, that we kind of joined forces and offer this holistic solution for the healthcare industry. And we stood up hospitals together. And within a very short period of time, we supported state-run vaccine distribution efforts. And so I feel like we had a really big impact, but sales in that particular sector never was an issue. Everywhere else, it had this initial kind of huge decline because of the amount of uncertainty. And so everybody initially thinks, okay, pull back. What's our revenue stream going to look like? What is the future of our business? And then as the year went on, it slowly started to rebuild, and people started to backfill positions that they had let go of, or add to teams as new projects were being created and new opportunities were identified through the pandemic. And so it really accelerated towards the end of the year. And now, if you look at our industry, right, just in terms of sales, it is closely attuned to GDP growth and what I would call the job posting metrics out there. So prior to the pandemic, February of last year, I forgot what the site was that aggregated this data, but there was somewhere around 12 million weekly job postings in the market. At the end of July, which I think is the most recent data that I've seen, it was close to 17 million, so almost 5 million more weekly job postings, which is everybody trying to backfill what they lost and then trying to make up for the acceleration in their business, all while you have more people retiring and leaving the workforce, wanting to be, more flexible, as I mentioned, getting opportunities to do work for global organizations outside of the U.S. or outside of the U.S. doing work for companies in the U.S. And so there's just this huge dynamic of supply and demand that is completely out of whack, where there's just way more demand than there is supply for people across every level of work everywhere.
So with this hiring and then recruiting frenzies that's going on, like everyone now, even if they weren't looking before, and now they just decide to you have nothing to lose, so they start looking. So what would be your advice for candidates exploring these new opportunities?
I think it's much more important to decide what you want in terms of like growth and opportunity than it is to look at jobs or companies. So in my mind, it's always about the kind of path that you're on to not necessarily the next role or the next job, but kind of what are you building along the way. And so if you want to be, let's just say, a product manager, right? And so you're working within a SaaS company, maybe you're doing some development. What are the 3 or 4 other things that you need to have? Like what's on that checklist that you need to have in order to get to your ultimate goal of being a product manager? And explore every opportunity you can. And I tell my team this, which probably isn't great advice, but if a recruiter calls you and they say, hey, I've got this really great opportunity, it's with a great company, blah, 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 blah. If it sounds interesting, I tell the people that work for me, I'm like, you should go on the interview, because if nothing else, it's going to teach you something. It's going to help you think outside of the box of like the way you think about things. So my biggest suggestion is think about what you want long term, and don't think about the job title or company name. Think about what it is that you want to have from an experience perspective to get you ready for that ultimate goal that you might identify. And if you don't know what that is, go on a lot of interviews and explore like what's out there and learn from what a ton of different organizations are doing to help you make that decision.
That's some great advice. I don't know if you read the book about Netflix. I forgot the title, but essentially that's what they encourage internally. Like if someone calls you, a recruiter reaches out to you, go talk to them, explore it. And then if you want to have a conversation later on, like the hiring manager, or not the current manager would be open to discuss it, whether it's still a right fit, whichever role that you're in right now. Compensation, same thing as well. So they actually encourage their employees to go on interviews.
Yeah. And, the one thing that I always learned is that what I want doesn't really matter, right? I mean, in the people business, I could want everybody to show up on time and give 110%, and it's never going to happen. And so you have to be willing to just care way more about what the other people want, and then help them understand either how to get there or to, really just kind of establish what the best way for them to think through some of those, needs and opportunities are, because that's really the only thing you can control is how you help somebody think about those things, not necessarily whether or not they're going to take action against them.
Mm-hmm. As a sales leader, what has been your all-time favorite sales play? And it could be anything.
I think there's 2 rules that I learned fairly early on, and I think they just hold true for everything in life, but sales in particular. People buy from people that they like, and the ultimate truth within the sales world is people will always run from fear more than they will run to pleasure. And so helping organizations and individuals really kind of avoid the pitfalls of what can go really, really wrong from doing something, whether it's just short-sighted or making a decision based on, the wrong parameters, versus selling them this, big pie in the sky, like oh, we could accomplish all these great, monumental things. And yes, that's possible. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you do these things the wrong way, if people aren't thinking about like long-term workforce planning right now and what that really means for investing back into your workforce, everything that they're trying to accomplish with recruiting all the new people in the door is in vain. So getting to know somebody and ensuring that they know who you are and what you represent in terms of character, I think is important. But then ultimately helping them avoid really bad situations more than you are painting them a picture of like what's possible. I love the art of the possible, but again, I think that those are the two truths that I always kind of remember in the back of my head when I'm in front of somebody and having a discussion around what we can do together.
So basically, like get to know them as a human level, and then focusing on the human psychology of loss aversion.
Yeah, I just think that if every single one of your conversations starts with let me tell you about what I do instead of let me tell you about who I am, then you've definitely lost the game.
Ah, I love that. Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, what are some ways that you've used and tested to get people to get to know you as a human? So I like that. But is there a fine line? Like, you don't want to go up to someone, shake their hand, and say, like, hey, let me tell you about who I am.
Well, I mean, at some point, I want to know who they are. I want to know. I want them to know who I am. So I think the first thing that is really important in today's world, and one of the main reasons I actually got to know you in the User Gems group is being able to introduce yourself to somebody by saying, hey, we know somebody in common. We know so and so from such and such, and they and I have worked together for many years, and that's why I thought it might be interesting for us to have a conversation with each other. And I want to tell you about who I am, and I just think that is so much more powerful than just trying to make some sort of an introduction around some product line or service offering, or make the assumption that I'm interrupting you in the middle of your day, or we're just meeting for the first time, and I know something about you that you don't know yourself. It's like you already know what you're working on and what your priorities are. And the main thing that I want to introduce is, hey, I know people within your network, so I'm trying to lower that that hurdle of kind of who is this person, and at the same time really just be more genuine from a personal level than anything else, because at some point down the line, we're going to eventually have a discussion about like, what do you do? Why are we having this discussion? Like that will happen naturally. The play, if you will, for me is the more people I know in my network that know me, it's not going to take you long to know who I am. I am who I am in every single conversation I have. So you kind of, what you see is what you get. But I would much rather start there, right? Because to work back there from, if we're just being professionals and talking about, something that's business related, to get personal from that point, is a harder build than it is to go from personal to business, I feel like.
That's true. And that's a very, very good advice, especially now with the conferences slowly reopening and people start traveling again. Keep that in mind, folks.
Yeah. Well, and that is a good point. I also think that if you cannot find at least some level of a personal connection, and it doesn't need to be super deep, but I mean things that you can discuss with somebody outside of the weather and whatever the business, like being able to talk to each other. It's really important in any business relationship, because especially in recruitment, things are going to go wrong. Things are probably going to go wrong at some point fairly quickly on in the relationship, because we deal with people. And if you deal with something that has a high propensity for variables and challenges to arise, you're going to need to work through those, and you're going to need to work through those through talking and really kind of collaborating versus, well, you said this and in the contract it says that. And it's like, yeah, I understand all that, but on a human level, we need to be able to interact, and then we can find our way through this without a doubt.
Yeah, 100%. So as final question, since we're running out of time, What is your number one DIY life hack?
Ooh, DIY life hack. I mean, this isn't so great anymore, but I never check any bags when I travel, and sometimes, when I'd go overseas, I'd be gone for like 2 weeks at a time or whatever. So I watched all these YouTube videos on how to fold clothes in the most efficient way possible. And it's funny because I worked at a dry cleaners when I was in high school, and so I used to have to fold a lot of like clothes, but I mean, efficiency and like space was never the thing. But so that was something that I always felt like I was super good at, and anybody that knows me that is listening to this will tell you. Literally, I travel with a duffel bag that is, I mean, not very big, and I just have found a way to always pack clothes, especially like suits and stuff that you don't want to get wrinkled, in the most efficient way possible without wrinkling them or doing anything like that.
Let me guess. Do you roll it up and then vacuum seal it?
Nope. So no vacuum sealing, and for some clothes, it's good to roll them from a space, but some it's more folding, and some it's like laying them super flat. Like t-shirts, you can get really flat, and so you can. Anyways, there's a bunch of videos that people can look up, but that was something that I was just always like super. I love doing that because getting ready for a trip and being able to just travel with the one bag that I could carry on versus having to check something or, go through all that hassle. That was always my favorite.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. That's amazing.